Welcome to episode 63 of the Tax Professionals podcast. In this episode, you'll learn how to study for the May 2023 CTA exams to maximise your chances of passing now that they're going back to closed book.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Back at the start of lockdown, Nitin and I met for the first time and sat down to record our first podcast episode together. It was announced that the ATT and CTA exams were going to be open book for the first time, so I asked Nitin to share his expert advice on how to properly prepare for these exams, as the approach is completely different to closed book exams. Now we find ourselves full circle, back to the starting point. The CTA exams are back to open book from the May 2023 sitting onwards. Many students think that the exams will therefore be more difficult, and whether that's true or not, many students are understandably worried. Whilst the exams are daunting, with the right approach and preparation, they are more than passable. This episode is here to help, covering both mine and Nitin's advice on how to prepare so that you can maximise your chances of passing. Throughout the episode, you'll hear lots of useful information, tips and advice, including how the exams will be different in May 2023, when you should start studying and advice for the study phase, the distinction between the study phase and the revision phase, and when you should move into the revision phase, how I approach studying for the closed book exams to achieve first time passes each time, Nitin's advice to better memorise information for this exam, Nitin's rant for why people fail these exams in his experience, advice if you're studying via distance learning, whether you should sit numerous papers in a single sitting, when you should have completed the study phase by and move into the revision phase, whether you should use legislation in the May 2023 exams. Rough timings for each of these sections can be found in the details section of the episode within your podcast player or by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP63. An important element of passing the May 2023 CTA exams is memorisation, and given the volume of information, that is tough. You'll hear Nitin talk about consolidation a few times throughout the episode, along with reference to tax flashcards or tax squares, which is one of Nitin's suggestions to help you to memorise things for this exam. For examples of the flashcards or tax squares, send one of us an email at either jack@thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com or cta@bpp.com. To supplement this episode and further help you pass the exams, download the study phase checklist that I've created for you. Download this by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/study checklist. The only link you need to remember is the link for the show notes of this episode, thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP63, which just stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast, episode 63. All other links mentioned throughout this episode are included within the show notes. I'll include a link there also to all the exam support podcast episodes and also the email addresses mentioned earlier in relation to Nitin and me. If, like me, you're interested in knowing what you're worth in terms of salary, then get in touch with James from the Tax Recruitment Company to benchmark what you're currently on. From his interaction with many different businesses and tax professionals, he has current knowledge of salary rates based on experience and specialism. Speaking with James could help you to negotiate a pay rise or determine it's time to find a new role. Contact details for James can be found in the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP63, or you can book a chat with him by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/salary chat. So, get in touch with James to benchmark your salary or discuss potentially available roles, particularly if you work in corporation tax, as he's currently recruiting for many roles in this area. How are the May 2023 exams going to be different then? I don't know if you remember actually, but the first podcast episode we did was the first open book exams way at the start of the back of COVID. So yeah, how are these May 2023 exams going to be different?
For ATT students, nothing at all. For ATT students, everything continues as normal. The exams will remain open book, so they can again take in any resource that they want to help them with the exam. And we've covered lots of those podcasts before. The biggest change, the massive change, is for every CTA exam in 2023 and onwards. They are reverting back to closed book. So that's the first big change. So there will be no resource available. The other change is the legislation. The legislation will now be online, and students will only be able to access the legislation online if they have paid Tollies or Kronerai for access to that ledge. And we could probably cover that in another session, how to use the legislation effectively. It is early days. It's a new software. Bear that in mind. I'm going to be encouraging my students to kind of not rely on the legislation for 2023 until we fully practiced it and we've seen how it works. I think students need to be very self-sufficient for 2023.
Okay, so are the exams still going to be done via a computer now, or is it back to exam halls, back to paper?
It's gonna be still. It's basically going to be in centre, but it'll be via computer.
Okay, fine. So ATT have not changed. CTA exams are going closed book. Legislation will be usable, but only via the online version. No more paper copies.
Absolutely, and students need to remember that it's not free. The legislation is not free. They must have an existing account with a provider.
Yeah, I think probably most people will have an account through their firm anyway. I don't know whether whether it needs to be restricted for the exams and stuff, but yeah, I'm hoping most people will have a copy of that. So obviously, bearing that in mind, the exams have been different now to what they were before for CTA. Like when in your view should a student start studying for these papers, for CTA papers?
I think the problem is, Jack, whether the exam is closed book or open book, you have to study from day one. Okay, that's key. But I think there is a serious game changer here. Whilst the exam was open book, there was very little pressure for most people to learn the content because they knew what they had in their revision folders, the study manuals, or the checklists and the summaries that you and I work on. Okay, they had that resource. There was this comfort blanket that they knew, so they could just focus on other areas of getting through the exam. Problem you now have here is you're back to rote learning. You're back to memorizing tax facts. Okay, and so for those students that started their CTA journey during COVID and their first exams were open book, are going to really struggle with the transition. However, those students that were on the crossover that have done the closed book exams will find it a little bit of a challenge getting back to the closed book mindset, but I think they'll be okay. And so you've got different types of students who are going to have different pressures in how they deal with this. And one of the key things at BPP, and we had a conversation about this recently, is that revision, not just learning, revision has to start from day one. Okay, revision has to start. You've got to start learning the content that you are going to apply to your answers. And one of the questions that I've been asked quite a lot recently is, will the exams become more difficult? Will the exams become easier? I don't think that's ever in the examiner's mindset. They're going to continue testing tax problems, tax scenarios as normal. Okay, and I think students need to be prepared for that. And I think, and the guidance that I want to give to anyone kind of listening to this podcast is to be exam ready. During COVID, all you had to worry about was applying your answer, whereas you've now got to worry about what you're going to use. The knowledge you're going to use to apply your answer requires early revision, early learning.
So you mentioned day one there then. So how early is day one to you? Should people start studying now for the May 2023 exams? Should it be start of December? How early do you recommend people get started?
I would say if you need to be guided by your tuition provider. So for most people, if you're going to go in centre or online, wait for day one of the talk phase. Let your tutors also speak to you, guide you. Okay, Tolley's tutors and Kaplan tutors are going to be fantastic at guiding their students. If you're self-study, okay, then yeah, you've got the benefit of studying early, and again, there'll be guidance through your providers to help you. But definitely, I would say most tuition courses will start February 2023. So that it's really from then that I would say students really need to start.
Okay.
Having a plan, basically. They need to factor in a plan.
So if people have some form of tuition course, whether it's face-to-face, online or whatever, your advice is to wait until that and not do anything beforehand, because I know from my experience, those taught courses don't cover everything, for example. Could people get a head start at all, or do you think don't bother?
The best advice is, I think if you wanted to get a head start, I would say concentrate on the admin. Yeah, I think the admin's a big one. I've always made a big issue out of admin. I think definitely learn the admin. I think if you're doing CTA, then there'll always be areas that you've studied already. Say for owner managed businesses, I would expect students to be pretty proficient with sole trader losses, CGT reliefs. Okay, so I think anything that has a relief or a loss or admin, you could start reading up on sooner rather than later. Definitely. Basically anything that's assumed knowledge.
So I don't know whether BPP did this, but when I did it through Tollers and Kaplan. So they gave like a sheet almost of like the chapters that they would cover in the class and the ones that were almost needed to be like self-study. Does that still happen?
Yeah, we do something similar. Absolutely, to kind of guide students. These are the key areas we'll cover during class, and there'll be clearly marked home study chapters.
Okay, cool. So in your head then, I know you've kind of mentioned that like revision almost starts on day one here, but I suppose there is still like a distinct study phase and then where it turns into full-on revision. What do you think is like the difference to you? Like, because study phase, obviously you need to learn some material and stuff. Revision phase, you should already know everything, right? How do you kind of like box it off in your mind?
Okay, so the problem you have, so if I go back to the open book exams, what was really easy for students to do was in the study phase, their main priority was understanding it. That was it. That's the only pressure they had, was understanding it. Okay, because we kept reassuring students, you don't need to learn it. It's all going to be there. Just make sure you're comfortable with the content. And when it came to the revision phase, it was pretty much focusing on spotting the issues. Okay, how to then articulate a really good answer in the time under time pressure, and that was it. And it was fantastic. But in 2023, from my personal experience, the pressure that I've got with students now is during the taught phase, not only do they still need to understand it, they've now got to memorize it. Yeah, they've got that, and that's an added layer. Okay, that's an added layer already on a very hectic family life, personal life, other commitments. Yeah, and they've got to find time for this. And especially if someone's listening to this podcast and is thinking of doing 2 advanced technical papers or advanced technical and application planning skills together, you need to be given a serious amount of time off if you're going to be able to cope with that kind of volume.
Yeah. So really, in your mind then now, the study phase exists of understanding and learning the material plus starting to memorize it, ready for that revision period.
Absolutely. Yeah. But Jack, going back, because and I always love when you talk about your experience. I'm asking you a question now.
Okay.
Is that what you did when you did your closed book exams? Is that, or did you? I mean, yeah.
The way I did it was I would go through all the material, then do the questions in the at the end of each chapter in the study manuals, do the questions in the question banks too, and then where there was something that I forgot about or didn't understand, I started making flashcards, and I tried to not use those flashcards, to be honest, though, until I started getting to the revision stage. So I almost thought like it's too early to start trying to memorize stuff that I could still forget. So I actually put it to one side, but I like prepared ready for it, if that makes sense. So I was ready to start getting that memorization in there, because also on top of that, I feel like when you're doing the questions and stuff, you'll start naturally remembering some things anyway. Do you know what I mean? But it sounds like you put more emphasis on making sure you start remembering in the study phase than maybe what I would have done when I did the exams. So that's the approach that I took anyway. Like, what approach then do you recommend for students in that study phase? Then, what's the expert tutor's view on that?
I think my view is that every student needs to have a game plan on how they're going to remember the content, and I think you've hit the nail on the head here. For some students, they may not prefer the early bird approach, thinking I'm going to forget this. This is not going to work for me during the talk phase. That's fine. Yeah, you can do it in the gap phase between talk and revision. Okay, you can even integrate it as part of your revision plan. Okay, but you need to have a plan. And that for me is the main priority, that I want every student doing CTA in 2023 not to then complain that they couldn't remember anything on the day in the exam. That is not a valid excuse anymore. Okay. For me, I'm very cautious. I love starting early. Okay. And I like taking a nice, easy, slow pace. But I have many students that would give me a heart attack and who will do it in the last 4 to 5 weeks. But that kind of high pressure, high octane, intense learning works for many people. Okay. So as always, I will say, do what's best for you, but go in knowing your stuff.
Fair enough.
No excuses.
No, I'm sure your students won't be able to have excuses anyway. I know you don't let people have them. So, with the people who have like tuition, then either distant, either webinars or face to face, then. So, is your advice then to wait until the talk classes, do the talk classes, do whatever they tell you in the talk classes to do outside of it, and just kind of go that way to do the talk phase? Is that the way that you suggest doing that?
Ideally, yes, I think so. And certainly in my talk classes, one of the things I will be providing my students with is I haven't really thought of the right name at the moment. It could be, their tax flashcards that I've produced, or tax squares. And so one of the things I want to do to help my students is I'm going to summarize the key content over 1 or 2 pages per chapter. So therefore, we're basically condensing 1,000 pages worth of content into 30 pages to learn. Okay. That's my way of doing it. Tollies have their amazing memory joggers. Okay. And it's really down to what works for the student. But ultimately, you have to consolidate. The key during the talk phase is consolidation. Yeah, because, and I think that's a big thing. But then that was never an issue during the open book exam to a certain extent. So I think, the priority is kind of learning, understanding, consolidating, and do it when it's best for you. And I think that would work really well.
So do you recommend that students do all the questions in the study manuals and in the question banks as well then, or do you think that's not necessary?
The way that I teach, I think I know some of my students prefer to kind of look at those, but we do kind of caveat it, they're not exam standard. So if you just want to test your knowledge competency and you feel that you would benefit from that, then go ahead. Excuse me. Whereas I'm very much sink or swim. Yeah, let's start looking at past papers from day one. That's my approach. I'd rather the student get used to the shock and awe of a question. Okay, learn to cope with that under pressure.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense, and because you are right, those questions are so much easier than the exam paper questions. And I remember actually doing like my first practice papers and thinking, this is like nothing I've seen before, because It's so much more difficult than the questions they give you in the question banks and stuff. Yeah,
and we make a real issue at BPP that certainly for taxation of major corporates, which is now called taxation of companies, large companies and groups. So I've got to get used to the name change. We show past paper questions from day one, literally day one. Okay, so that students fully. It's only when a student sees, like you've said, so it's only when they see a past paper question for the first time, do they really then appreciate the challenges, okay, and the hurdles that they're going to face. And that's why a lot of my students do actually start revising early, start learning sooner. They kind of realize after day 3, I'm actually not being able to cope with the volume.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Past papers is the way to go. But again, the NIT mantra. It's not about how many questions you practice. It's about spotting the issue, spotting the scenario, and then giving an applied answer. I think too many students are still knowledge dumping, Jack. They think CTA is all about, if I just copy out some text, I'm going to get the marks. You're going to get 0. The examiners, becoming very strict on this. They want solid applied answers.
Yeah. And to be fair, I do think actually going back to closed book is probably going to help with that, because obviously when people had the textbooks in front of them, they literally like, here you go, take a chunk out of that and stick it in. Whereas now, if they're doing that, it's at least going to have to be from memory. So it's going to have to be their own words somewhat, and they're going to have to have processed the information and understood it at some point, to some degree at least anyway.
Absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, open book was great. And I teach qualifications that have open book, but, and then you're constantly warning students, please don't copy out. Please don't, cut and paste. Whereas now I'm more, my mantra is going to be slightly different. Have you learned this? Can you remember this?
Yeah.
So from a tutor's perspective, it's nice to kind of be a little bit more proactive with the learning.
Just a reminder to benchmark your salary, find out what you're worth, or discuss available tax roles, get in contact with James at the Tax Recruitment Company. Contact details can be found in the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP63, or you can book a call with him by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/salary chat. You can also get further help to pass these exams by downloading the study phase checklist, which I've created for you, by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/study checklist. Have you got kind of any magical advice around how people could remember things? Because obviously that is going to play a big part in these exams, as you've kind of pointed out a couple of times already.
So basically I think there are, Jack, there are. I think what it is, from my perspective, is that if you understand something, if you can understand the scenario, the background, I think half your learning disappears. So, for example, Jack, if I can use you as an example, if Jack owns Jack Limited and Jack is looking to sell the shares, okay, typical scenario comes up in quite a few papers. If I asked a student, what are we thinking of straight away, I think many students will say, oh, it's going to be business asset disposal relief. Okay. And I'll say, whoa. Let's take a step back. See, that is the fail student. The pass student will go back and look at this and say, right, we've got Jack Limited. The first thing they need to pick up on is that Jack is an individual. Because Jack is an individual and he's selling shares, it will be capital gains tax. Yeah, there's a chargeable disposal. So you get a mark for that. Then you've got to, I then said Jack is selling shares, but I didn't say who to. Yeah, it could be to your wife. Yeah, well, suddenly that's a no gain, no loss transfer. Okay. It could be to someone connected to you. So suddenly you're now into the world of, okay, that's going to be market value. Well, then what is the value? Then you're suddenly into the world of gift relief. Okay. But I didn't mention the percentage that Jack owned. Yes, I've got to check the percentage. Then I just said Jack Limited. Well, is Jack Limited a trading company? Is it an investment company? Or is it a trading company with investments? And that is how a CTA student will pass. Because what to do, you can sit back, and if you learn and think about the questions you need to ask, or the issues surrounding that scenario, you can do any question that comes your way. Yeah, and I think that's a nice, relaxed way of learning. Okay, rather than, and if people just kind of take a step back and understand each one, like share options. Yeah, with a share option, the share option that you have is dictated by the size of the company or who they want to offer it to. Whereas too many students kind of learn the tax rules without understanding the background and the context, which makes this exam more difficult.
Mm-hmm. And you actually think then learning it from the scenario also makes it easier to remember rather than coming from it the other way?
I think so. I really think so. And I remember in owner-managed businesses a few years ago, there was a EMI shares question, and they actually tested an EMI at a discount. And there were so many students that complained and said, oh, the examiner's never written a question like that before. But the students that passed said, oh, if there's EMI, you've got to check that there's no discount. So they were that's what the CIOT want. They want proper advisors to pass this exam, not those who've just memorized the rules or pass papers hoping there's going to be duplication.
Yeah.
And that's why the pass rate is where it is, because students aren't stepping up to the plate and delivering what's expected of them.
I suppose that is a difficulty with this exam, because it's not just memory and it's not just applying. You need both. And both of those things are equally difficult, really. So you're going to have a strength in one of those probably more than the other, but they're both difficult things to do hand in hand.
Oh, they are. And I think it's no different to being a doctor in one sense, that if you're training to be a doctor, you've got to ask 10 questions before you know what the problem is.
Yeah.
Yeah. When a client comes in and says, I want to sell my shares in the company, we need to ask questions. We need to probe before we can give the right advice.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Does your advice change at all, by the way, if someone is doing purely distance learning as opposed to going and getting tuition? Do you think?
Do you know, I'm not a fan of distance learning, but I have come across students in my time who I have nothing but absolute respect for, where they've passed the advanced technical. Okay, they've done OMB, they've self-taught TOMC, but these students don't need tutor support. That they're determined, they know what they're doing, okay, and they will pass. And if you're doing distance learning because of budget issues, finances, I get that. I would say do the taught phase distance learning because you can teach yourself content, but then get yourself onto a revision course. I think that's key. However, the only time I've seen distance learning not work and actually be detrimental is for the application planning skills paper. Yeah. I actually had a student this year who came on my taught phase, and I spoke to the student before he booked with BPP, and I said, look, you doing the taught phase, you're going to struggle to pass this exam. So he then said, okay, I'll come on the revision phase only. I said, you're still going to fail the exam, because either way, taught and revision are so embedded and interlinked on the APS paper that you need to see through both. It wasn't me trying to earn extra revenue for BPP. I was genuinely being honest. Okay. And this student actually asked me for support on revision during that time, but I couldn't do it because he was at that point not a BPP student. He had chosen to do revision on his own, and he'd realized in the last few weeks before the exam, he was actually going into the exam blind, because he was getting no support for the pre-scene and everything else. And I think for the application planning skills paper, you do need a lot more support. And also, Jack, all 3 training providers offer pass assurance. Yeah. Okay. That once you've come on the course and you've sat the mocks and you've met a minimum requirement, you don't have to pay for that course again. Okay. So it's not as if we want to kind of generate additional revenue for the sake of it. We want to support these students and help them qualify. But students don't always see it from that angle, which is a little bit frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, I do agree with the application skills paper. I did do that one face-to-face, actually. I think that I didn't do it actually for the reason of thinking it would make it easier to pass it. I actually did it because it was human capital, which is the area I specialise in, and I wanted to meet people who also work in human capital taxes. I did OMB, actually, distance learning. And so I suppose my advice for people who are doing it that way is to start going through the study manuals as soon as possible. And kind of do it in like a bit of a mechanical way, really. Do the chapter, do the questions at the end of the chapter, do the questions in the question bank, move on to the next one, and just go all the way through it first and get kind of that understanding and knowledge. And then you can start doing some of the stuff that Nit's talking about in the revision phase, which is like doing practice questions and stuff and making sure you're memorizing things, etc. But that was the kind of the way I did it, as I did go through it really step by step. I suppose ready for that revision phase where obviously we've got the questions and stuff. I still had to send questions in to get marked and papers to get marked. So I remember that was part of distance learning, which is actually invaluable because it forced me to do that when I wasn't doing it otherwise. But that pure study phase, I think that mechanical approach was good for me because it made sure I covered everything, and it kept me motivated actually as well, almost knowing that I was ticking through it bit by bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Jack. And I also think, remember, every sitting in March and September, you've also got the CIOT's exam skills and focus sessions, which is, currently at £15, which is fantastic. You're getting a whole day with a tutor from Tolley's, Kaplan or BPP, going through exam standard questions, technique, and they're amazing. So there's a lot of resource out there, all the podcasts that you and I have done and the extra ones that you've done with other people. And I think there's a lot of resource out there, but I think students need to commit time.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed a lot in 2022 is a lot of students took on CTA with lots of family issues and problems, when they shouldn't have done. I mean, trust me, how these people that I spoke to, how they studied, despite all the challenges, it was just, gosh, I couldn't have done it. And I have nothing but respect for them. But I think for 2023, I think your physical health, your mental health, and all the other stuff needs to be factored in. Okay. And I think it's really important that people don't sit more than one advanced technical paper at a time. Yeah. And please, please, please don't sit APS and advanced technical for the first time together. It's a lot of pressure. There's a lot to learn, and I think students, anyone embarking on this needs to really think carefully. Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, again, I always, whenever we have these chats, I always realise how much I actually did like the opposite of your advice a lot of the time, because I actually set the two human capital. Go on.
But you're a machine, and I think what it is, Jack. I think it's like I'm not joking. I had one guy contact me in August in July, August, the results came out. He's head of tax for an organisation, Jack, head of tax. Yeah. And he said to me, I want to do both papers, OMB Advanced Technical, Individuals Advanced Technical. Jack, I spent half an hour telling him, yeah, you can't cope. You will not be able. And he's got 2 young kids as well. Okay. Get to September, he contacts me. I can't cope. I want a deferral. And Libby and I see it all the time. And people, I get it. People have this high drive when they initially start. I want to do this. I want to get people are in a rush to get this qualification. Okay. And I understand the motivations behind it, but 9 times out of 10, it backfires, unless you've got the proper training support. If you've got the study leave that your firms provide with you, and you've got you can log yourself off and not worry about clients for 6 weeks or whatever time you're taking off, then yes, you can sit 2 papers. Yeah, yes, you can manage it. I'm not saying no, but a lot of the students I speak to don't have that luxury. They don't have that comfort.
Yeah, that's the point, actually, because you do need the time to it. I suppose I was in a fortunate position at the time because no kids, about consultant level at work. So, bit busy, but nothing like a head of tax. So I could come home and 3 or 4 nights a week, I could spend 2 hours studying and then put a whole day aside on the weekend. And I did that pretty early on. So like, if it was me now, I'd have probably already started going through the study manuals for like the next exam, just because it's the way I am. And I also think it means it takes more pressure off you later as well. Because if you can find the time now, it means you don't need to spend some time later on as well, doesn't it? Which I think is helpful. I suppose my advice is to start as early as possible, even if it's just like 1 chapter a week or 2 a week, whatever. It's something small. It will all help big time when you start getting close to that exam and you start realizing you have less time and maybe that you should have done more earlier on.
I 100% agree with you on that. And I think what anyone, again, listening to this podcast needs to get in touch with you or me to obtain the samples of how we've done the consolidation, the tax flashcards. And I think that's important. I think they need to start, they can use what we have, or they can create their own, but that needs to happen now. And you're right, the sooner they can start. And I think the problem we have with where we are, depending on what sitting you're doing, you've got to make that time, and if you do it in little small bursts, it builds up into amazing wealth of knowledge way before revision. I agree.
Yeah. Like 1 chapter will take you 30 minutes to read. It's not much time, is it? And as you say, over those weeks and months, it builds up a lot. So it does take a lot of pressure off you close to the exam. So is there anything that we haven't kind of talked about yet in relation to the study phase that we think we should cover so that students are aware of things, or any last piece of advice on that part?
I think what's really important is with the study phase is back to traditional methods again, timetable. Okay, the study phase, the whole point of the study phase is to make sure that you are revision ready, basically. Okay, and during the study phase, it's going to be about keywords, I think. Whatever topic you're working on, whatever chapter you read, you need to think about, if this came up in the exam, what are the key areas? What's the tax impact that you need to be able to put on a flashcard? Yeah, that I think there needs to be that deliverable. What I don't want students just doing is reading a chapter, doing questions and thinking that's the end of it. Okay, because that's kind of like, that's not structured learning. Whereas if they just spent an extra 5-10 minutes saying, actually, these were the top 5 points I've picked out of this was the key bits I need, great. Okay, for example, if you're looking at, say, enterprise investment schemes, okay, on individuals advanced technical, after a student has read the chapter, I would expect them to know that you can't own more than 30%. It has to be an unquoted trading company. You've got the investment limit. You've got the tax reducer. If you hold the shares for 3 years, then and then sell the shares, the gain is exempt. That's it. Just having that, you've built up an amazing technical base. Does that make sense? And I think they need to be a little bit more mindful, especially those that sat their first CTA exams during the open book period. They're going to need to do this. And certainly at BPP, we will be supporting students on showing them how to do that. Okay, so that because I think what it is during and after the talk phase, the student will need something tangible to hold on to. Okay, so that they can then use that knowledge and apply it on revision.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say it's a good point, actually. Yeah, when I talk about like reading material and stuff, I do think you've got to engage with it at the same time. I think that's kind of what you're saying with extracting these key points. You're not just reading, then you're actually engaging with the material at the same time, right? Yeah. I'm going to kind of give like my off-the-cuff summary then of what we've just said in terms of our advice then. I think it's start studying as early as possible, with the exception of if you're on a talk course, you can wait until you get there. But if you can start learning some things beforehand, great. It's just going to help you. Focus on scenarios and being able to identify the key tax points and start preparing for memorizing information ready for the revision phase so that at least you're ready with that. Is there anything else you want to add on that summary? No.
I would say, no, just to kind of remind people again one more time that when you're studying, it's all about the tax impact, the scenarios, admin and reliefs. Yeah, and it really is about trying to make your life, trying to engage with it, as Jack rightly says, to help you understand it.
Sweet. So what's your advice for when someone should have completed the study phase, if we can use that word for it, and is ready for the revision stage? What's that cut-off point in your mind?
I would say, personally, for 2023, I'm still open to this, but I think the study phase really stops the day before revision. Personally, yeah, I think because students now need to learn the content, they need to be given a little bit more time. I think they're going to need a little bit more time understanding the content and learning it. I think once they're into revision, that the learning needs to stop. Yeah, it's more about, on the revision phase, what I want my students to do is no different to before. Read a question line by line, spot the issues, but then use the flashcards if they need them. Try and let go of the flashcards at this point. Try and do it without the flashcards to see what they can spot, what they can think of, and then cross-check it with the flashcards. Yeah. And once we've done that, you can then build your final watch-outs. Okay. Does that make sense? They don't, so for example, on business asset disposal relief, most students will remember most things, but they might forget the claim. Yeah, they might forget to mention the claim due date. So I think that way, then the quality of your answer will be much, much higher when you actually get into the exam.
Okay.
That'll be my ideal position.
Okay, so when you're saying stop studying at the revision phase, when does the revision phase start? And I'm trying to almost like give people a deadline to aim for in a way, like to make sure that at least by that point studying's done.
I would say generally revision starts 4 weeks before the exam.
Okay, so 4 weeks before the exam. And do you know when they are at this time? Is it the start of May or is it like second week or something?
Yeah, it's usually start of May.
Okay,
So we're looking at April.
Okay, got it. So my kind of next thing I just wanted to briefly talk about is legislation. You have touched upon this right at the beginning of the episode, saying that this has now become a nine. So a lot of the stuff I was going to say around this, I think, is redundant a little bit now. But obviously, when I did the CTA exams, I did use the legislation a lot. Like, I didn't want to be completely reliant on it, but I wanted to make sure that if I couldn't remember something in the exam, I had that safety net of being able to go and refer to it. And
I agree. I was the same.
Yeah. So how do you think people should be using it now then? Because with this online version, for example, are you going to still be able to go and highlight stuff? Are you going to be able to like have like a saved list of key sections and stuff like that? Do you know how it's going to work at all yet? Because that's what I would be having questions about.
Yeah. At the moment, okay. There's been various things been going on where we looked at the legislation and stuff. The problem at the moment for me, and this is my personal opinion, and I'm putting a legal caveat here, these are not the views of BPP. I'm not confident and comfortable to recommend the use of legislation at the moment to my students, because I think there's still quite a bit of work to be done to make sure it's fluid, it works. Yeah, that's my concern.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, and I'm being honest. Yeah, because I want to go back to holding legislation sessions again, showing people how to use it and how to use it online. But the problem at the moment is, yeah, I think it will slow students down possibly.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. So you're actually not allowed to take in the paper books anymore then? You're not even allowed?
No, it's online. It's all online.
That feels like a shame in a way, doesn't it? For this like transition period almost. I feel like the paper versions would have been a fallback for people.
Yeah, and the CIOT have been amazing in, they're doing a lot to make sure that, the exams in 2023 are all going to, it's all going to work okay. But remember, you're relying on technology. Yeah, and the problem you potentially have is, if you've then got the legislation, is it going to be fast? Are you comfortable? Can you spot, And the problem as well I find is I'm very much old school. I like something in front of me, okay, and where we could highlight it. And, for example, the demerger conditions, the EIS conditions, they're all in there. But the reason why I'm not fussed about the legislation, and I'm going to be honest here, is because the CTA exam is not about copying out the ledge, which a lot of students did. Okay, they would just copy out chunks. Whereas, so for that reason, I'm not fussed if they don't use the ledge. The only time I think the legislation is so important is the admin.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I'm a big fan of the ledge, and I'm really hoping at some point before the May exams that I get to do a session with you and other students. James Howell, yeah, as well, on basically effective use of legislation in the exam. But with that, I'd want to try and get the CIOT on board as well.
Okay.
So that students can really see what's going on.
Okay, fair enough. So for now, then, it's almost watch this space with the legislation and get ready to use it if you need to. Yeah. To be fair, in the study phase anyway, you can get away with not using it. I did only because I was trying to piece it together and start getting like a deeper understanding of the stuff. But that by all means was not necessary. And actually looking back, it was probably not a good use of time. I'm just that sad person that liked doing that. So I did do it. But yeah, I don't think it's going to affect the study phase anyway. I presume when it gets close to the exam anyway, the whole online legislation stuff will be in a better position to know whether it's going to work and how it's going to work, and with students being able to use it if they want to in practice using it. So yeah, just wait until that point then, by the sounds of it.
Personally, I want to wait until after the May 23 exams. I know that's not going to provide comfort to a lot of people, but I want to see what the experiences were for those. I don't want to kind of tell everyone, yeah, it's going to be fine. It's, because it is technology. It's a massive exam hall. Okay, and things can go wrong. There have been other qualifications, okay, where the IT hasn't gone to plan, and and touch wood for the CIOT, that doesn't happen. So it's not that CIOT are doing anything wrong. They're not. It's just it's new, and I think we just need to be careful.
Okay, fine. So that's in its warning then on legislation. Be cautious of the IT. Any final tips then, any final tips, Nick, for the study phase then that you'd like to leave people with as like the last final thoughts for the episode?
Yeah, if you want guidance on how to do the flashcards, contact Jack or myself, and we'll send you some samples. Okay, stay positive, stay calm. Yeah, less is more. Okay, start early.
Yeah, easy. Keep it simple.
Exactly what Jack has said, and yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and I just want to add something in, Jack. Sorry, it's like I for May 2022, the OMB paper, the taxation major corporates paper. I had a lot of students that came to me from different training providers that had failed that exam, and they were complaining on how difficult the exam was. And when I showed them the actual answers to those particular questions that they were querying, many of them were actually quite upset and annoyed at themselves. They actually hadn't spotted the basic issues. They were actually embarrassed. They were like, oh my God, one student actually got 49%. Okay. And had she spotted that it was a 75% gains group and the transfer was no gain, no loss, she probably would have passed that exam. It was that basic. And you're absolutely right. It's keeping it simple. If and don't waste time on, like we say this all the time, don't we? Don't waste time on obscure stuff. Don't badger your tutors with what if this, what if that. Yeah, just let the tutors show you what you need to do to pass, and you'll be absolutely fine.
The show notes for this episode include all the links mentioned throughout this episode, including links to the study phase checklist, other episodes to help you pass the ATT and CTA exams, and also mine and Nitin's email addresses so that you can get in touch. If you would like samples of the tax flashcards or tax squares to help with memorisation for this exam, then send me or Nitin an email, but feel free to get in touch just more generally too in relation to the exams. Nitin and I are planning to do a revision phase episode 2, so to make sure that you don't miss out on that, head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe, and on that page you'll be able to sign up for email notifications to make sure you don't miss out on the revision phase episode. But that's it for this episode. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.